Hello and welcome to Region Locked. Hideo Kojima is one of the few video game designers that needs no introduction, with his rich plethora of games from Zone of the Enders to the upcoming Death Stranding and of course his Metal Gear series. Fans have collected, obsessed over and attempted to play every game that has his name attached. This hasn't been a problem, as all his games have been released and translated outside of Japan, with the exception of one. Today we're talking about Policenauts. Policenauts was released in 1994 for the NEC PC 9821, with a 3DO port a year later and a release on the PlayStation and SEGA Saturn in 1996. Most people consider the SEGA Saturn release to be the definitive version of the game for its updated visuals, light gun support, and the inclusion of bonus content. Policenauts is presented through a crime noir cyberpunk aesthetic, taking inspiration from films such as Blade Runner and Lethal Weapon. The game follows the story of Jonathan Ingram, a member of the Policenauts, a group of 5 astronauts with extensive police training who are assigned to protect Beyond Coast, the first functioning space colony in the year 2013. While testing a new spacesuit, an accident causes Jonathan to drift from his craft into deep space. Though presumed dead by his team, Jonathan survived the incident with the assistance of a deep sleep module built into his suit, leaving him in a deep slumber for 24 years, waking in the year 2037. 3 years after his rescue, Jonathan, who has taken up the profession of a private detective in Old Los Angeles, is visited by his ex-wife Lorraine. She asks Jonathan to assist in solving the case of her missing husband, Kenzo Hojo. The only clues to his avail are a torn leaf, a small collection of pills, and the word Plato. After leaving Jonathan's office, Lorraine is murdered by a man wearing a motorcycle helmet. Unable to catch the assailant, and despite his initial reluctance, Jonathan decides to take on her final request. Jonathan travels to Beyond, reuniting with his old partner from the LAPD, Ed Brown. The two set out to investigate the suspicious circumstances surrounding both Hojo's disappearance and Lorraine's murder. While primarily a graphic adventure game, Policenauts also includes puzzle solving and even shooting. With the game's Saturn release, new features were added to allow the player to use the console's Virtua gun, known as the Stunner in North America, and play these sections as a light gun shooter. The game features a brief bomb disposal section and other smaller sides to the main game. When it comes to investigation, the player is able to inspect objects and question characters multiple times in order to uncover additional information, opening extra dialogue and descriptions. This is a necessity, as often the game restricts progress unless the player probes for more information or investigates all elements of a scene. With certain choices changing the tones and mood of characters, the player's actions can alter the responses that they get. This opens the possibility for multiple ways of progressing through the game. Hideo Kojima's classic style is obviously present throughout the game, with its film-like cutscenes, extensive dialogue, and tendency to break the fourth wall. Policenauts is the first of his games to include summary screens, which remind the player of the plot when loading a save file. It is also the first time he introduces each of the key characters with their name and the voice actor who plays them. Kojima explained how Policenauts came to be in an interview with The Guardian. While working on Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, Kojima expressed there was difficulty asking programmers to implement very specific dialogue or music cues because he found that they would work to their own style or timing. He stated, "It was hugely frustrating making games at that time for me. I wanted to control everything. So after the second Metal Gear launched, I developed my own scripting engine and decided to work on adventure games so that I could have complete control over when the animation played or when the music was triggered. That's when I developed Snatcher and Policenauts. It was a way to take creative control back from the programmers." Initially conceived under the title Beyond, Konami were unable to claim a copyright on just a single standard word, and thus the game became Policenauts. The game was also originally going to be listed under the new genre of cinematic virtual reality. This had to be changed to interactive cinema, however, as the term virtual reality had already been trademarked. 4 Japanese voice artists went on to have roles in Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1. Hideyuki Tanaka, the voice of Jonathan Ingram in Policenauts, also voiced Hal Emmerich or Otacon. Kaneto Shiozawa, who plays Tony Redwood, voiced Grey Fox. Naoko Nakamura plays the BCCH receptionist and played Sniper Wolf. And lastly, Masaharu Sato, who played Salvatore Toscanini, featured as Donald Anderson in MGS. However, it wasn't just voice actors that Kojima carried over into the Metal Gear Solid series. A sample of the End of the Dark track from the Policenauts soundtrack is played over the Konami Computer Entertainment logo screen in Metal Gear Solid. Meryl Silverberg also features in the game as part of Vice Unit. Though she isn't actually the same character that's featured in Metal Gear Solid, she has a very similar appearance, and she was the last member of Foxhound before it was disbanded after the fall of Zanzibarland. Incidentally, Metal Gear Solid 4 also references Vice Unit by having Meryl wear a bullet earring like she does in Policenauts. The Rat Patrol Team 01 consists of Jonathan and Ed in reference to the main characters Jonathan Ingram and the Chief of Vice Ed Brown, who themselves appear to be inspired by Riggs and Murtaugh from the Lethal Weapon series of films. Meryl also wears Dave Forrest's orange jacket in the end scene of Metal Gear Solid, at the same time as Solid Snake also reveals his name to be David. Drebin893 of Metal Gear Solid 4's favourite soda is Narc, the same name as the addictive drug in Policenauts. Otacon seems to be a big fan of Policenauts. In Metal Gear Solid, he has posters of the game on his wall, and it's even visually referenced when discussing bipedal tanks. And in Metal Gear Solid 4, it's Otacon's PC desktop wallpaper in the Nomad. The exoskeletons worn by various ninjas throughout the Metal Gear Solid series are made by Tokugawa Heavy Industries, a company featured in Policenauts. These are just a few references Kojima has included in the Metal Gear Solid series. Kojima also lent his own voice to the game in a brief cameo as an AP officer in the shootout at Tokugawa Industries. The game also references other titles published by Konami, such as a shelf of CDs containing musical tracks from different games. While this area is only a minor part of the overall release, it actually takes up a large amount of the game's disk space, totaling 1/6 of the game's overall size. When it came to producing the game, concerns were raised with how much could ultimately be included, with this section being considered the easiest to cut back should storage issues arise. In the opening cutscene of the game, a neon sign can be seen in the background of one of the images that reads Solid Snake. Even Jonathan Ingram's surname could be a reference to the Ingram Mach 11, the submachine gun that is featured in both Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. There are also several references to Kojima's previous adventure game, Snatcher. In Ishida's pharmacy, the player can see a Snatcher calendar hanging on the end of a row of shelves. A message on Jonathan's answering machine plays music from a club Outer Heaven featured in Snatcher. A newspaper article on Jonathan's wall is from the Neo Kobe newspaper. Neo Kobe is the fictional city in which Snatcher takes place. Also, in the game Tokimeki Memorial, which was also produced by Hideo Kojima, it is possible to watch a movie of Policenauts. Again, there are plenty more references throughout these games, these are just some of the least obscure. As previously mentioned, there are numerous versions of the game. The initial NEC PC release was the only version to feature the hand-drawn pixel art, as the computer rendered all graphics in real time. These graphics were completely overhauled for the 3DO release and all subsequent releases. The special edition of the 3DO version came bundled with a mouse and an official Policenauts mouse mat. Shortly before this release, Konami put out a demo in the form of a pilot disc. The disc also contained various interviews with voice actors and developers, and even an in-depth encyclopedia about the world of Policenauts. Some of this information came included as extra content in both the PlayStation and Saturn versions. Other than the light gun support for the Saturn and the increased frame rate of the cutscenes from 24 frames per second from the PlayStation's 15 frames per second, there are few differences between these final releases of the game. Hideo Kojima opposed one change in particular relating to the player's ability to jiggle women's breasts, as Shuhei Yoshida, the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, found it excessive. Kojima recalled this in an interview with Famitsu. I was contacted by Sony Computer Entertainment, who told me, "We're going to decide in an upcoming meeting how many times breasts can jiggle." I argued over and over with them, saying that's absurd. In the end, we worked things out, but I'll never forget arguing over the breast jiggle issue. In the PlayStation version of the game, the animation of the jiggling was reduced, and the player had fewer opportunities to do it. While Policenauts never received an official English release, there was a time when a release overseas was considered. This is confirmed by the presence of an English press release on Konami's official website in 1996, claiming the game to be a sequel to Kojima's Snatcher on the Sega Saturn. The game also had an English mock-up cover shot produced and printed in several promotional pamphlets for Sega games packed with other Saturn titles. However, according to translator Jeremy Blaustein, who had worked on the official translation of both Snatcher and Metal Gear Solid, rumours of an official, partially completed Policenauts translation script were false. He said, "It's false as far as I know. I was in the international business department at Konami when it came out, and I never heard of any plans to release in the US then or since." Contradicting this, according to Kojima, the international version was worked on, but the developers weren't able to sync the game's English dialogue with the animated cutscenes, though the legitimacy of this claim cannot be confirmed. While the game ultimately never saw a North American release, in the end it would be up to the fans to create their own translation, the first of which being the PlayStation version of the game. The project had a long development period, with Mark Laidlaw, not to be confused with the writer of Half-Life, and Artemio Urbina translating much of the dialogue. They worked on this in the summer of 2007, but encountered problems when it came to programming their translation into the game itself. It would be a year before Something Awful forum user slowbeef began working on getting the script inserted into the game, leading to a revival of the project which would come to completion in 2009. Despite the PlayStation version being considered an inferior release to the Saturn, it would be a number of years before another translation would surface for the Sega console instead, once again built upon the translation work from Mark Laidlaw. That's all for today, but did you know Region Locked is supported by Patreon? This game was actually selected for coverage by our Trivia Don patron Chris Ingersoll. Thank you for that. If you'd like to support the show, like these here champions, then please check out the link in the description down below.
Chad Bonin was gone. Trevor Woodham shot him down like a common street rat. This case had the familiar stench of Mr. Spectre and Malcavio all over it. I've had Robert Cox breathing down my neck ever since the incident with Vitas Varnus. It was time for me and Hector I. Morello to pay your boy Beowulf a little visit. The Three Mastered Gamers, that backwater stinkhole, was the source of all of the Pandion in the city, and Maximilian Summers knew it. I'd been investigating the synesthetics for some time now, with the elusive Phantom Sonic at the heart of it. I guess I shouldn't complain. Scum like Dean Avenger Jr. and Max A Few Trades are the only thing putting food on my table. But every night I still hear the cries of Killian from the block. That's right, read my name, you dirty girl.
Don't forget to subscribe for more region-exclusive video games, and if you really liked it, then get the notification button on the go, because then you'll see every single one. Great news. Now I'm gonna go rub my Psychonauts. It's not called Psychonauts, it's called Policenauts. God damn it.